When Resident Evil 7 was first revealed, I, like many, were skeptical, but I was also excited to see the potential. It was going to be a vastly different experience overall. But in the end, does Resident Evil 7 end up delivering a great experience for Resident Evil and horror fans alike, or is this just another disappointment to this long-running franchise? I wanted to be as optimistic as possible going into Resident Evil 7, seeing that it was just as big of a change from 6 into 7 as we saw originally with Code Veronica into Resident Evil 4, and I learned to love both. We're not going to see that classic Resident Evil style again, unfortunately, so for me as a longtime fan, I just wanted to see what the series was still capable of doing, and Resident Evil 7 did surprise me. The game is a completely first-person perspective, and this allows for different horror elements than we have seen in previous entries, though we did have bouts of first-person in a few games, including Gun Survivor, and a few moments here and there throughout the course of the games, but never for an entire main game entry. I will argue that Resident Evil 7 potentially has some of the best atmosphere we've ever seen in the entire series, just from the creepiness and the horror perspective that we get to witness as we're going through the game. I don't want to get into too heavy spoiler territory by any means, but the game revolves around the main character of Ethan, who is trying to save his girlfriend Mia, who has gone missing. She's been missing for 3 years now, and originally when she went missing, she had sent a video saying, "Hey, don't come after me." But now, 3 years later, he's received some package that tells him to go after Mia and tells him where she's located, in Louisiana of all places, a setting that we haven't really seen in Resident Evil before. This leads him into the bayou and the swamps and to a mansion that is owned by a family, and sooner rather than later you quickly meet the family and find out that things are not quite right. The game thrusts you right into the horror and atmosphere from the first moments that you arrive, going into the house for the first time and just browsing around. If you played the demo, that's pretty much how the game kind of starts off, but quickly deviates from that and you get a bigger, broader picture of not only the mansion, but the game itself. While it entirely takes place within the area of the mansion, there are several places to go. It is similar to Resident Evil 1, where you only have the mansion and the areas around the mansion to go after, and that's exactly what's happening here with RE7, and there's some great buildings and other locations that you go to which really amp up the adventure. RE7, though, is much more survival than it is action, unlike the previous entries in the RE franchise. Here, you don't have a lot of weapons at your disposal and not a lot of combat skills. You're not going to be blasting an enemy in the kneecap and then running up and doing a spin kick in order to knock them away. You do get some better weapons as the game progresses, but the better weapons, even with them, you're not getting a lot of ammo in order to use them against the different enemies. It's once you start exploring the mansion that you immediately have this tension at all times. You never know when another creature or monster is going to pop out, and you're always running through doors and then quickly trying to turn around and close the door behind you in order to try to get out of the view of whatever is particularly chasing you. 9 times out of 10, it's better to run than to actually stand and fight, with a few exceptions like the game's few boss fights. While you're always going to know kind of what your next objective is, it felt more like a classic Resident Evil in a lot of ways, where you're going through the mansion itself and having to find different keys. So you may go into a room, realize the door's locked there, and then go to another room, and then eventually finding whatever key it is, and then you can backtrack to a previously explored area in order to unlock a door. You'll even have times where you leave the area you're currently in completely and find a key elsewhere and have to return with it. So it's kind of a throwback feel in that way. In fact, there's even a theme to the types of keys you end up getting, similar to like the old card suits that you got in Resident Evil 1. One of the few things I wasn't the biggest fan of was the overall creatures that you're dealing with. While the family is awesome, they're well developed, they're absolutely insane, and they have some cool things that end up happening to them as the game progresses without trying to spoil too much. But then there's the Molded, which work as kind of like the regular enemies of the game, and they have a similar kind of presence to the Ouroboros monster from Resident Evil 5, or going back to the slime leech zombie from Resident Evil 0. They're everywhere, you're going to be dealing with them quite a lot, and they can kind of pop out of nowhere, but I wasn't a big fan of their overall design, and there's only a couple of different styles of these Molded that you're going to be dealing with, and outside of a couple of minor things like bugs, there really isn't a whole lot of creatures that you're going to be facing throughout the game. Throughout the course of the game, you're going to be finding plenty of items to fill up your inventory, including, of course, the other weapons. You have handguns, shotguns, grenade launchers, flamethrowers, and a few others, as well as, of course, you'll be finding herbs that kind of work interestingly, but very similar to the classic, where you have a default herb that you can use to kind of heal up a tiny bit. You can combine an herb with a chemical in order to kind of make what would be the equivalent of 2 green herbs together, or you can find the stronger chemical, which is actually red, and combine that with an herb in order to get a full heal. So there's kind of a little nods and throwbacks when it comes to the healing items, and the chemicals can also be used to mix with gunpowder to create ammo for your different guns. Not really exactly like Resident Evil 3, but a little bit similar. There's also collectibles for you to find, plenty of files that give you information. You have collectible antique coins that you can actually use to get a few special items in the game. And in fact, there's even more coins if you decide to play the game on the hardest difficulty. The game features 3 of them, easy, normal, and madhouse difficulty. As well as there's also these like bobblehead-like statues that you can find throughout the course of the game as well. While it didn't seem like it at first, especially for my first few hours of the game, it progressively becomes more of a Resident Evil title the farther you get in, once the story develops a little bit. There's a few twists and turns throughout the course of the story, which were okay, as well as there actually is multiple endings, though the differences between the endings and how you get them is really kind of bland in execution. One major spot of contention for the game as far as the way not only it plays, but the way that the story is told, which will be kind of a complete opinion. There's going to be a lot of people that like it, and a lot of people that dislike it, but for me, it's my favorite aspect, and that's the fact that Resident Evil 7 felt much more like a horror movie than an action movie, which I really felt like the Resident Evil had gone completely action with just a sprinkle of horror, whereas this was much more horror with a sprinkle of action. From the technical side of things, the game ran smoothly. I didn't run into any major glitches or hiccups as far as slowdown or frame rate drops or anything like that, as well as it never crashed on me during my gameplay. Resident Evil 7 is of course a full price release and does feature a full trophy list in Platinum, which a lot of it's going to be beating the game, beating it on the different difficulties and 100%ing it, along with a few challenging ones like not healing a lot during a playthrough and not using the item box a lot during a playthrough. I may be completely delusional in saying so, but Resident Evil 7 kind of felt right. It's not Resident Evil 1 or 2, it's not Resident Evil 4 or 5, it is completely different from the previous games, yet still feels like it fits into the entire franchise, especially as the game progressed as far as the story execution was concerned. But there's also plenty of little nods and things that remind me of the old games, and even little Easter eggs here and there. In fact, one of my favorite moments, completely useless of a moment, but there's a number pad and a character enters the number pad lock code in, and it plays a sound effect from classic Resident Evil. And the stupidest smile appeared on my face because it was just that little bit of nostalgia, along with just everything else that I really kind of enjoyed RE7, which I'm actually a bit surprised that I did. I've been a long-time fan of Resident Evil since pretty much day one, and while I transitioned from Veronica into Resident Evil 4, and I like both, the more recent games have completely lost me. I just really became bitter about playing new RE games, so I was very nervous going into this one, and honestly, it's renewed my interest and potential fandom for Resident Evil. It honestly felt good to sit there and play all the way through the game again like I used to with the classics, and I plan to go back and play through Resident Evil 7 a few more times in the next few weeks. That doesn't mean that Resident Evil 7 is flawless. There are a few little pacing problems, a bit of issue when it came to the aiming and overall combat, but that may be part of the charm of the whole kind of survival horror-esque thing that they're going for, where you don't really have that like perfect aim and ability to take out enemies as well as a trained combat soldier or police officer. There were also a bit more variety to the monsters, would have been welcomed, as well as the game isn't extremely long. It took me 7.5 to 8 hours in order to play through it on my initial playthrough, but there will be some added DLC added in the next couple weeks that I'm looking forward to playing as well. I wouldn't have expected it when it was first revealed back in June of last year, but I'm going to be giving Resident Evil 7 a 9 out of 10. But anyway guys, that's going to wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course I hope you enjoyed.